You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Fargo, the new virtual assistant from Wells Fargo, makes banking faster and easier. Like this.
Fargo, what's my checking account routing number?
And this.
Fargo, turn off my debit card.
And this.
Fargo, what did I spend on groceries last month?
And that's just the beginning. Do you, Fargo? You can. In the Wells Fargo mobile app. Learn more at wellsfargo.com/getfargo.
Terms and conditions apply. Your mobile carrier's availability and message and data rates may apply. Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.
Hi everybody and welcome to Who Did What Now, the history podcast that's not your history class, with me, your host, Katie Charlwood, history harlot and reader of books. Oh, I am sorry for the delay in getting this episode out. I know it's just like a day late, or almost a day late at this point, but I was laid up for 2 days with what I can only describe as an excruciating headache. I felt like someone was chiseling into my brain. I had to have ice packs on my face. I have these I can only describe them as smooth stones. Like they're like polished stones and they're very cool against the face, and I would press them on my face and move them around and stuff. Apparently they're meant to move stuff inside your head. I don't know. I would try anything. This is the girl who literally made a wish on a dandelion the other night because they ran out of ideas of things to do that could help a situation. A friend of mine was in hospital and I was really upset and really worried, and I wasn't going to pray, was I? No, it's not helped me so far. So crying in my back garden, away from people, hiding from people I was. And I'm getting the laundry, it's fine. No, I was crying in the garden, holding a dandelion, making a fucking wish, because I was scared shitless, because I was worried that this person was gonna die. And that's exciting. I made a wish on a fucking dandelion. So no wonder I'm using stones and shit. Maybe there's properties in them that do stuff. I don't know. So, in news, I suppose, skipping ahead from me having a fucking breakdown. It wasn't a breakdown, I was just really sad, and it's okay to feel sad about things and to feel helpless, and especially when I'm neurodivergent as well, so sometimes I know that I'm not gonna be the most comforting person, and I find it easier to be comforting when I'm physically in the space with someone. Like, that's not possible, like, in this scenario. Because, you'd be surprised how much relief can be provided with a hug. I'm such a good hugger, even though sometimes I just can't deal with it, but it's another story for another day. But I'm such a good hugger, it's ridiculous. It's I'm very cozy, I snuggle very well. Sidebar, my children use me as a pillow quite often. Sometimes they'll straight up lie on me. I'm that comfy. And also they're dicks who like to make my sleeping uncomfortable. Not that I sleep much anyway, but that's not the point. Anyway, I had a point, don't know what it was, moving on. I am going to be speaking at the very last Heartland Pagan Festival. It's into the night, it's going to be so good. I'm doing a talk with a Q&A, and then I've got 3 workshops. So the 1 hour talk with a Q&A is Witchcraft and Mysticism Throughout Human Evolution. And then I have 3 workshops The Victorians Ruined Everything, a 19th century guide to mystics and more. The Old Gods and the New, Colonialism, Ethnic Cleansing and the Pagan Revival. Paganism and the Patriarchy, over 5 centuries of demonizing women. So yeah, there's also going to be a live podcast recording there as well, but you'll actually have to be there to find out what that is. So I'm going to put a link for registration down below, and you get a discount if you use the code KATIE23, so KATIE 23. So that's going to be fun. Yeah. I'm going to be, in August of this year, I'm going to be doing a speaking engagement, a little talk, a wee chat, something a bit fun at the Dunfanaghy Workhouse for Heritage Week, because the theme is living heritage, and, you know, I've got a wee something up my sleeve. You're gonna love it. I'm sorry, but my friend Shauna she just sent me a reel. She's one of the few people that I allow to send me memes, because she's one of the few. And she sent me I think it's Cher and someone who are dressed, the only way I can describe it is tacky camp rhinestone cowgirls. It had me fucking giggling. Jesus Christ. Last year's New Year's, we had a theme of women who definitely didn't kill their husbands party. It was very femme fatale. It was fabulous. And there was gowns. There were gowns, darling. And crowns, gowns and crowns, because that's just how we live our lives. And I am now planning the tackiest outfit, and I'm so happy. You have no idea. Like, this is going to be glorious. Oh my, and oh goodness, I don't even know if I mentioned it. I, on a personal note, deleted all of the dating apps. I just deleted them. I'm not on anything. I'm not looking. I'm content with where I am right now. It's good. I like it. I like where I'm at. I think I'm in a really good place, like, mentally, I say. I mean, the life's a shit show and everything around me is going mental. And oh yeah, I sent my book proposal into, like, the publishing agent that reached out to me, the first one. And now I've had another publisher reach out to me, and I'm not gonna, like, deal with them unless things don't work out with the first one, because I kind of feel like a dick about it, you know? But we'll see how it goes. But I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, quit your jibber jabber. In fact you, I will. But first, we've got to get our source on. Elizabeth Stride and Jack the Ripper, The Life and Death of the Reputed Third Victim, by David Yost. The Five, by Hallie Rubenhold. The Whitechapel Murders, The Bendigo Advertiser. The Whitechapel Murders, Penny Illustrated Paper. The Illustrated Police News. The Police Registers of Public Women. I'm going to apologise for my pronunciation on these next couple ones. Göteborg Landsarkivet. The Korset Records. I feel like I sound like I'm underwater doing that. Immigrant and Popular. Göteborg's Domkirkoförsamling. Oh, and the 1835 to 1860 Gothenburg censuses. Why can't I pronounce things properly today? Night Walking, A Nocturnal History of London by Matthew Beaumont. Sex, Sin and Suffering, Venereal Diseases in European Society since 1870 by Leslie A. Hall and Roger Davidson. Domestic Service and the Formation of European Identity by Antoinette Fauve-Chameau. Syphilis and Marriage by Alfred Fournier. Sexual and Social Politics in Victorian London by Seth Coven. Coffee and Coffee Houses by Ulla Heiss. The Rise and Fall of the Victorian Servant by Pamela Horn. A History of European Women's Work, 1700 to the Present by Deborah Simonton. Eden, The Nation's History by Franklin D. Scott. Policing Public Women, the Regulation of Prostitution in Stockholm, 1812 to 1880, by Yvonne Svanström. Jack the Ripper, the Definitive Casebook, by Richard Whittington Egan. And casebook.org. Are you sitting comfortably? Good. Then let's begin. So before we really get into it, we should probably touch base on a few things about Elizabeth Stride. Elizabeth is known as the third canonical victim of Jack the Ripper. I have a difference of opinion on that one, and I will explain why at some point during this ramble. And also, in addition, furthermore, Elizabeth definitely falls into the category of what some would seem as the less dead. Definitely, she would fall into this idea of being a less worthy victim. And the whole purpose of this series, the 5 canonical victims of Jack the Ripper, is to tell the story of these victims, of their lives. And I'm not saying that Elizabeth was necessarily a bad person. I'm just saying that she is a product of her environment. And did she always take the most righteous path? No. But sometimes that path wasn't really available to her. And yeah, but let's just get into it. So this episode is dedicated to Aubrey. And now let me tell you the tale of the life of Elizabeth Stride, the third canonical victim of Jack the Ripper. So Elizabeth was originally from... You know what, that's fine, I'm keeping it in, I don't care. Elizabeth was born Elizabeth Gustav's daughter on the 27th of November 1843 to Gustav Eriksson and Berta Karlsdotter at the Stora Tummelhed farm in Torslanda, Sweden, which is still relatively close to Gothenburg. Elizabeth is the second child in the family and also a second daughter. So she has a big sister, Anna Christina, who's 3 years older than she is. And, I'm sure that these farmers in rural Torslanda were really happy to have another girl in the house and not a strapping young man who could do the heavy farm stuff. Well, they don't actually have to wait too long because her younger brother Lars is born in 1848 and Svante in 1851. So, there were boys coming. It's fine. But this is, a farmland, and it was actually a period of drought. So, obviously that's not good. However, even though this is not the best time, agriculturally, this family is actually doing pretty okay. So, Gustav, he's pretty comfortable as a farmer. They're doing pretty well because they've got fields of potatoes and flax and grains and all that good cereal stuff. But they've also got cows, chickens, pigs, and a horse. So they're doing fairly well. They also have servants. Now, there was this act passed, the Servant Act of 1833. And what it did was it made so that anybody who didn't have their own source of income, they didn't own land, they didn't rent land, they didn't, have a full-time job, they didn't have a trade, anything like that, that it was compulsory for them to find a job, generally as some kind of servant. So, but this was a two-way street, so it meant that nobody could overcharge for their labour, but also that they would have to be treated a certain way and they would have to act a certain way. So you couldn't refuse a reasonable request by your employer. So you couldn't decide to just doss off on something, but they had to pay you a decent wage. You would be dutiful and fulfill your obligations and, be obedient. But it also meant that you had to be looked after and cared for as a servant. So if you were sick or ill, it was your employer's responsibility to ensure that you were like well cared for, that you had the necessary like medical supplies and you were looked after. They had to nurse you back to health effectively. And they also had to take care of your spiritual well-being. So your employer had to be the person guiding you, religiously, And another thing that's funny about the social class in Sweden is domestic service wasn't generally seen as like a lifetime goal. That wasn't going to be your long-term job. It was to be like a short-term job before you got married. And so most families actually had servants. So Gustav and Co, they had servants. And, the children, when they grew up, they would go and do some domestic servitude of some kind. And then they would get married and they would have homes of their own. One of the reasons why women were supposed to go into domestic service was so that they would learn how to run a household. As if they didn't grow up in one, you know what I mean? And the thing was, it became a concept of kind of like keeping up with the Joneses. So some women, in order to have that, societal sort of peerage, whatever, they want, or hierarchy, I should say, which is not kind of the same. It's very funny because everybody had servants. So some people would have more servants, even if there wasn't enough jobs for those servants to do, just to say that they had servants, to just show off. So, yeah, in this farm, there were servants and maids and farmhands, all that good stuff. And again, the way that the class system, it's not like a caste, there's a lot of social mobility in this. So maids would share beds with the daughters of the house. It was a communal living situation. You would be eating dinner at the same table as your employer. You would be doing your prayers with your employer. And I think her family was Lutheran. They were Lutheran. So Elizabeth would have had a Lutheran upbringing. So she grew up with servants in the house. And she learned the basics of being a farm girl, really. And all the kind of things you would learn, churning butter and all that kind of stuff. And, all the kind of stuff inside the house. How to clean floors and other such things. Cooking. Of course, cooking's part of it. Cleaning, cooking, domestic labour. So she would have had a very basic education. So parishes would have schools and the boys would have got more of an education than she did. So she could read, as far as I know, but she couldn't write. But she wasn't, she wasn't stupid, right? She was smart. And because she came from a good Lutheran family, she was expected to have a better knowledge of the Bible and stuff. So she was supposed to be well versed on that. But yeah, Elizabeth, Gustav's daughter, she has her confirmation at 15. And at this point, her older sister, Anna Christina, has already been, out doing her servitude for 2 years at this point, I think. And Anna Christina is quite lucky in a way because this happened more regularly than you'd think. So the employer that she worked for, they ended up getting married. So she was actually really, really lucky in that sense. But because Anna Christina was already out there and already in Gothenburg, it was much easier to find employment for Elizabeth, especially because Anna Christina was doing so well and because she was a respectable young woman in that day and age. So the fact that she was doing so well, and because Anna Christina was such an upstanding citizen, Elizabeth would be seen the same by extension. And so Elizabeth, who's a month away from her 16th birthday, she heads to Gothenburg for her work as, domestic servant, as a maid. And, she's desirable as a servant because she is from, a rural area. So although there's like not really like a distinct class system in Gothenburg, there still was a preference. They wanted, the farm girls. They wanted the women who had not grown up in the city, because growing up in the city, it makes you aware of the darkness and the debauchery that's sort of kicking around. But these rural girls, these farm girls, they were seen as, naive or innocent, depending on how you want to flip that coin. So Elizabeth has left Torslanda and moves to the Karl Johan parish in Gothenburg and into the home of Lars Fredrik Olsen. Now, Olsen isn't like very rich, but again, this is all part of the Servants Act. And he and his wife Johanna, they have 2 servants. So you've got Elizabeth and then Lena Carlson. And I don't know how much work there was for the 2 of them to do, along with like the mistress of the house. So I don't know. But again, it's more of a pride thing than anything else. But, the girls couldn't really go out and do anything without, their master or mistress's permission. So they wouldn't be going out to the beer house, and they wouldn't be going out to meet, or find, I suppose, a paramour of any, situation. And because of this, the majority of the company that Elizabeth would keep is basically whoever's in that bloody house. So the men, the women, whoever is frequent flyers in the Olsen household, that's the people she's hanging out with. Now, clearly, some kind of fraternization happened in that household. And here's the thing, it's not uncommon for, relationships to occur, in those kind of close environments. However, there's definitely a power dynamic here, even though he's just like the wealthy, lower middle class. She's a farm girl, you know what I mean? She's a servant, and regardless of how it works, a master and a servant, there's always going to be a bloody power dynamic there. And Elizabeth, well, something happens in that house. Because, contracts usually last like a good number of years, because the whole point is for these women to like get a grasp on household duties and to like earn a dowry to like make their money. Now, it's supposed to last for a decent amount of time, but this employment is dissolved like just under 2 years, like a year and a half. So October 1862 is when the employment starts, and then it dissolves in February of 1864. That's just over a year. And so she moves to a different address, which is like just up the road a wee bit, actually. It's just like round the corner. And she's still listed as a domestic servant, but she's not listed as a servant to whom. So I'm thinking, logically about this, it seems to me that seeing as she was in an abode and was not, willingly forthcoming with the name of an employer, it seems to me that she was maybe a little bit of a kept woman. Maybe she had been promised something. Maybe this person was making good on their promises, and maybe they were going to have to stop that soon. Because by March the following year, Elizabeth is very clearly pregnant. She's like 6 months along. So wherever she went to, somebody was, having some fun up there. And this is a takes 2 to tango. We don't know if she was forced into a situation or whether this was, I'm going to call it grooming, whether it was grooming or by force and then had no other option, or was, I don't want to say a willing participant, because again, the power dynamic, it doesn't feel comfortable, because at what point does she really have agency? Because clearly she has been left out in the cold in this one, and not just because it's March in Sweden, but she's clearly pregnant, and she becomes of notice to the authorities. Now, you're thinking, why would they care if a woman was pregnant? Well, here's the thing. In Sweden, it was basically illegal to have a child outside of wedlock. And if you were seen to be less than virtuous, well, then the police would be looking for you. So they had this register of public women, right, in Sweden. Well, there's two lists, actually. People who were suspected, and then people who were, official. And basically, how do I put it? It's like a whore list. It's like a list of prostitution. And if you had a child outside wedlock, you're basically seeing the same. A woman selling her body, right? Now, I'm going to call this prostitution because I don't see agency in this. Like, it's not like modern, someone chooses to be a sex worker. There's a lack of agency here. This is a forced situation where women have no other option. So Elizabeth, she is perceived as being, a fallen woman. And as such, she's basically pushed into the scenario. So she has to go on this list, this official register, and she becomes Allman Kvinna 97. Part of me just wanted to go Dutch with it, but with that weird Swedish voice I do whenever I speak Dutch, and just be like, 97, and you would have been like, yeah, that's totally Swedish. You'd be fooling me there. No, I don't know Swedish numbers. My brother speaks Swedish. I probably should have asked him. But anyway. Because, up until 1864, having affairs, committing adultery, and having illegitimate children was, illegal. But the weirdest thing is, this is gone now, but it's still perceived as bad, as dodgy, as shitty. Except the only person it seems to punish is the woman, Quelle surprise. So this police register, the two lists of the suspected and the actual lecherous living women, full of debauchery and deviancy and all those other D words. And she gets taken and gets put on this register, and people who are suspected, they're taken in through the back of this police station, and they get inspected, they get stripped naked, and the whole point of it is to shame and to ridicule and upset. The same thing we saw with Polly in the workhouse originally. It's all to do with placing the burden of the blame solely on the woman as if it's their fault. And see, this is where the Contagious Disease Act comes in. So there are these laws that, allow this to happen because they're trying to quell the spread of syphilis. Because of course it's the women's fault that the syphilis is spreading, not the men who are wetting their whistle. No, it's the women's fault for doing it. So Elizabeth goes in, she gets inspected, and as it turns out, she has syphilis. Now, syphilis is a weird disease, so it kind of has long-term effects if not treated. It's not treated the same way now as it was then. Back then, it was treated with mercury, and they would do sort of mercury infusions into your body. They would do how do I put it? They would diffuse it. They would have a mercury steam. Now, because Elizabeth was pregnant, they couldn't do that. They wouldn't use mercury on her, which is one thing. But what they did use on her was acid. They used acid to cut off, warts and whatnot. And trigger warning, I'm going to talk about child loss. So you might want to skip forward about a minute. Okay. So, what happens is she's in there for a month, and she ends up, as a result of this treatment, prematurely giving birth. And there is a stillborn baby girl. As a result of this treatment, now, the child could have contracted syphilis while being inside her, but again, we won't know that because, this procedure caused an early death. Now, that's going to be an incredibly horrific experience for this young woman to go through, and to go through it alone, and to have, again, this horrific shame and blame on her, as if it's all her fault. And she's in the cruiset, and she is labelled as a fallen woman, the villain, the vixen. And basically she can't get a job because she's on this fucking register. And as a result of this, she ends up having to go into the very line of work they accused her of initially. Now, because clearly whoever the man was who was supporting her initially, the moment she got picked, he just fucking skedaddled. Like, don't know what he did, but he didn't do the right thing. That's all I'm saying. And she ends up moving to what is commonly referred to as Nymph Street. So it's basically just like, kind of like the red light district. It's just an area of women selling themselves to the Johns. You know, because they have to fucking survive. Because there's literally no other option available to these women because they're on the bloody register. Anyway, at some point after this, she gets treated for a venereal ulcer and she goes back into the closet. And when she's there this time, so she'd gone out at May and come back in October, but then of November that year, she is seen by this lovely Lutheran lady, Maria Ingrid Wisner. So, like, her husband is, like, a German composer, I think. Anyway, there was this sort of trend that happened of sort of these slightly lower class, sort of religious women who saw these fallen women as they were, as kind of like a charity case, like rehabilitation. You know, they would provide them with, you know, spiritual counselling and give them an opportunity to get out of this hole. So Elizabeth gets her healthy tick, ding ding ding, off she goes, and they're like, she's cured. She's not, by the way, because syphilis comes and goes and it's dormant, and it's a whole smorgasbord of just horrific things. But anyway, the symptoms are cured, shall we say. Okay. So she goes to work as a domestic for Maria Wisner, and she gets an offer of work, of a home, and someone willing to give her like a helping hand, an opportunity. And Elizabeth grabs it with both, you know, she's like, yes please, thank you. Because there's only two ways to like remove yourself from the police register, and that is to have a decent member of society, state that you've been like clean living and being a generally good old person. And the other one was to get married. Clearly whoever put her in that position didn't help her out, but that's neither here nor there. So off she goes, and she goes to work for the Wisners. And Maria writes a letter in order to get Elizabeth's name struck from like the register of shame. So now she's off the register and she can start living her life a wee bit. And what's been happening in Gothenburg at this time is it has become like a pretty big trading city. So there would be people, like, I think they were called like Little Londoners or something like that. So you would have all these different nationalities coming in and out of Gothenburg, and the opportunity for work and travel, you know, was more common than you'd think at this time. And so Elizabeth, because she'd been there with the Wisner, she wasn't there too long, but because of the reputation that she'd gained, she was still being watched by the police. Like, they were still keeping an eye on her. Because having your name struck from the register just wasn't enough for them. They wanted to catch you again because of their own twisted morality. But because she had to resort to prostitution down on the Nymph Street, there was every possibility that she would be recognised and her reputation would again be thrown into question, and the shit would hit the fan for her. So she's only with the Wisners a little while when, somehow, she receives a windfall. So she gets some money, and she says it's an inheritance from her mother's death when her mum had died like a couple years earlier, so doesn't really seem likely. And also, the issue is that, women under 25 in Sweden weren't allowed to inherit shit, so kind of an issue. Don't think that happened. So clearly this money came from somewhere. Could it possibly be from someone who felt really fucking guilty about everything they did to her? Perhaps. We don't know that. That's just a guess. An educated guess, but a guess nonetheless. I didn't mean to rhyme, but there we go. So, luckily, fortuitously, in a crazy random happenstance, an opportunity befalls Elizabeth. An opportunity to travel to England, to get out of Sweden. Being a part of a royal family might seem enticing, but more often than not, it comes at the expense of everything else, like your freedom, your privacy, and sometimes even your head. Wondery's new podcast, Even the Royals, pulls back the curtain on royal families, past and present, from all over the world, to show you the darker side of what it means to be royalty. From icons like Grace Kelly, Oscar-winning actress turned Princess of Monaco, who the world saw as the ultimate good girl. She mastered playing a happy wife and mother, but beneath it all, she was desperately lonely. Grace spent her whole life working towards perfection, and it ultimately cost her her happiness. Or King Ludwig II from Bavaria. He was only 18 when his father died, leaving the crown to him and a duty to rule that he never wanted. He refused to lead, and used the funds from the royal treasury to further his extreme love of opera. But this choice eventually cost him the crown and his life. Follow Even the Royals on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can binge Even the Royals ad-free right now on Wondery Plus.
The regular season is heating up. New stars are emerging, and that means more opportunities to win up to 25 times your cash on Prize Picks, the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projection on a wide variety of stats, and place your entry. It's that easy. Let it fly to turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. Easy gameplay, quick withdrawals, and injury insurance on your picks are what make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. Watch your favorite players and get paid doing it this basketball season. See your entries make progress during the game or make new entries for the second half and the fourth quarter. 3-pointers, assists, rebounds, and everything in between are yours for the taking. Join the Prize Picks community of more than 7 million players who have already signed up. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit of up to $100. Just download the Prize Picks app and use code GET100. That's code GET100 on Prize Picks for a first deposit match of up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
And Elizabeth looks round at her life and goes, fuck this for a game of soldiers, and gets on a ship and heads to London. So when Elizabeth lands in London in the winter of 1866, she is working in this townhouse in Hyde Park, or near Hyde Park, right? Who she was working for, we're not sure, but they were fucking rich. They definitely were loaded. They had money. Money. Because you don't live near or on Hyde Park. Not on Hyde Park. Nobody lives on Hyde Park apart from the fucking pigeons, but you don't live near Hyde Park without having decent dough. So she's there, she's working there, and as she's doing her daily errands, she saunters into a coffee house for a wee nibble. And who does she meet? Somehow, someway. But John Stride. A carpenter by trade in his mid-40s. And he's one of 9 kids, which is, sometimes being one of 9 is not too bad. I can allow it. And he was for a while looking after his elderly father, who had made a business and a decent living, but for a bunch of reasons he off-skedaddles and ends up in London, to make his own way, to be a decent carpenter. And he is. That being said, John was not Elizabeth's only admirer. So when she was working in Hyde Park as, just a wee housemaid, she was courting a police officer. I don't remember if they were City of London or the Metropolitan Police, because I feel like there's, maybe it's the Met News, the Met Old. I feel like there's definitely two different police forces at work here. But yeah, one of them, there was a dude, he was a policeman and he was courting her, but because domestic servant, housemaid, the hours are long and unsociable, so yeah. And like another thing that would have been difficult for Elizabeth, who I forgot to mention was apparently just stunning. She was like 5'2", and had like dark curly hair. She was meant to be just gorgeous. But yeah, Elizabeth's hours were long. And also, like, as I said, like in Sweden, the social hierarchy isn't really as severe as it was and or is in England or the UK, or however you want to put it. Now, everybody had a maid in Sweden, like everybody had servants, and it was kind of the norm. Everybody just did it. But here, in the fancy townhouse in Hyde Park, there would have been a hierarchy. There probably would have been like a butler, a housekeeper, a valet, governance of some kind. There would have been like anything, like loads of these. It's a hierarchy. It's a fucking pyramid of people. But yeah, it would have been a very different like way of being. She wouldn't like spend the same sort of time with her employers. There wouldn't be the same level of fraternization that there was with, the people in Sweden, which I guess is kind of a good thing for her. But there is a rumour of like some kind of scandal happening. We just don't have any information, but just a whisper of a scandal that forced her to leave that employment. And I think this was either late 1868 or early 1869. But whatever happened, she did manage to leave with a reference, which is great. And she ended up securing employment. And she ends up working for Elizabeth Bond, who's a widow, and she owns this. It's a fancy boarding house, right? It's for the genteel clientele. So, like, decent lodgers, not scummy lodgers, like, well groomed and mannerly, respectable, with just enough money, that sort of way. And then in 1869, Elizabeth marries John Stride. And what's like funny about this is she's Lutheran, he's Methodist, but instead of picking like one over the other, they just get married in like the local parish. Just like, that'll do, that church will do, fine, thanks, brilliant. Now Elizabeth, as we've said, gorgeous, and she's 25 at this point. John Stride, we literally don't have any definitive description of the man, but he's in his mid-40s, so he's either aged really well, or Elizabeth is looking for comfort in an older man. Again, not here to judge. But yes, on the 7th of March 1869, Elizabeth Gustafsdotter becomes Mrs. Elizabeth Stride. And for whatever reason, we all know the reason, but Elizabeth, she's keeping her past hidden. Like, she actually puts down a fake name for her dad. Well, she gets someone else to write it down, because obviously she can't write. And she calls him Augustus Gustafsson. Like, she could have told them any name and they would have been like, yep, that sounds right. She just made it up. So after they get married, they move out into the East End over to Poplar, because John is going to open his own coffee house. But he's also near enough to the docks as well, so because he's a carpenter, it's like he can fall back on that work. And that's great. So John and Elizabeth, they're hoping that they're going to grab people in this coffee house, because John's teetotal. And so he thinks this is going to be like an easy like jump. Honestly, they're just ahead of their time at this point, because selling a delicious caffeinated brew in an area with high footfall, that's just smart. Like, that's a well good idea. Unfortunately, the people of the time, they are more interested in beer and gin than they are in coffee. Yeah, coffee houses, they kind of had a tough fight with the pubs, really. That's some stiff competition, which the Strides were soon to learn very, very quickly. So by 1871, here's the thing, most new businesses fail within the first 2 years. That's just a fun fact for you. And this is no exception. So they had to move their business because there just wasn't enough people who didn't want to go drink booze. And also, it's the Victorian era. I'm not surprised people wanted to get drunk. Like, I mean, have you heard about chimney sweep scrotum? I'm just saying. So they moved their business, up to the Poplar High Street to try and get, more footfall, more trade. And this business wasn't doing too well either. So they were kind of relying on an inheritance, actually, because John Stride's dad, William, he had properties, he had built up, decent money, and for most of John's life, he had gone and supported his dad. He'd stayed home, he'd done everything, and apart from his brother Daniel, who seems to have had some issues, resulting in a whole thing where, Daniel stole some money, and John refused to prosecute him, and eventually he just leaves. John just goes to London now. So when his dad William dies, everyone's expecting, a piece of the pie. Now Daniel inherits a fuck ton of shit. He earns property and everything else, and money. His sister Sarah Ann, who lived just 3 or 4 doors down, she inherits some property. John's pretty rich brother, who's a fucking surgeon as far as I remember. Edward, yeah. He gets fucking property and everything. And John gets sweet fuck all. Nothing. Not a smidge, not a whisper, not a consideration. There is no reference or acknowledgement to John in the will whatsoever. And, I mean, that is... William, you are a petty bitch. That's all I'm saying. And you say that women are, the vicious ones. Clearly, this dude, spiteful, vindictive, just a dick, actually. Just fucking awful. So yeah, John and Elizabeth, they had to sell the lease of their coffee house. And John had to fall back on his, his original career as a carpenter. But again, he's in his 40s. He's not a young man. And this is physical work. It's not easy. But he has to, and he's going to do everything he can to try and, keep them safe and secure. And it's 1874, and he's working, they're surviving. And during all this time, you may notice I have not mentioned pregnancies or babies. During, a period where this would have been likely to happen. It's Victorian London, they would have been shagging. But chances are that because of contracting syphilis when she did, it's highly likely that Elizabeth was, infertile. That she at the very least couldn't, carry a pregnancy to term. But no children were had at all during this time. So we don't really have too much information, or any real information, over the next couple of years. But in 1877, Liz and John have separated. Now, Liz, she hasn't gone into a workhouse yet or anything like that. She's decided to take her chances on the street. So she gets arrested a couple times for vagrancy, drunk and disorderly, and she used to live with a teetotal man. So clearly she's out self-medicating here. So because she has been roughing it, she's been sleeping out in the streets, Elizabeth gets forced into the Poplar Workhouse. She has to go. Now, she does return to John at some point during that, and they try to make it work again. So the following year, this accident happens. It's probably one of the biggest tragedies in London in the last 100 years, probably, ish. And it's the Princess Alice disaster. Now, this is but like a boating day. It's a day out for the members of this German church, right? So it's mainly women and children that are on this boat. And what happens is this boat sinks and a fuck ton of people die. And Elizabeth, she's thinking, I can use this to my advantage. And she starts telling people that, you know, she was there with her, you know, 7, 8 kids, 9 kids, too many kids, right? And some of them died, her husband died, and the kids were in an orphanage, and she got kicked in the face, and that's why, like, her teeth are damaged, and that's why she has no palate in her mouth, which is a sign of long-term syphilis, for the record. And I've spent a lot of time studying venereal diseases. Don't ask why, just accept it. And she's not like on the official register of people that applied for this grant that you could get, this relief fund. But she seems to be telling this story to like anyone and everyone who listened to her, effectively. So Elizabeth, she is, how to put this, she speaks English so well that you'd think she was English. But she could probably convince people that she was German, because, like, most English people probably wouldn't have recognised the different forms of accents at the time. Yeah, it's foreign. And she would have said, I'm German, I'm from, like, a certain part of Germany. They would have been like, yes, that is correct. So, yes. And she would tell this story when she was separated from John, especially because she was like, my husband's dead. Please give me money. My husband is dead and it's very sad. Money, please. So yeah, she would use that. And it would also be really convenient for her when the time she was separated from John, you know. But they reconcile here and there. And then in 1880, she actually contacts the Swedish church and asks for relief fund because John is sick. And she enters into the Stepney Union Workhouse in February. And then in April that year, she ends up in the Hackney Union Workhouse. And yeah, she's got, how do I put this? She's referred to as destitute. So clearly things are not great for her. And somewhere along the lines, she gets the nickname Long Liz. Something to do with her long face, or maybe her hair, or another one I heard was it was because stride means like a long step, and it was just like a play on that. Because, I don't know. I mean, it's at least imaginative. It's got a tiny bit of thought in there. But Long Liz, she gets called Long Liz. And by 1881, she gets admitted to the Whitechapel Workhouse Infirmary because she's got bronchitis. So she's there, she's being treated in it's like December of that year. And then by January of 1882, she gets moved out of the infirmary and into the workhouse. So the bronchitis is they're like, it's under control. You can go into the workhouse now and you can work and, earn your keep. And I think John's also in an infirmary or in a workhouse at this point. But their marriage completely breaks down, and then Elizabeth sort of in and out, here and there, comme ci, comme ça. She lives in 32 Flower in Dean Street, which is, I'm going to say dodgy, to say the least. And in 1884, Elizabeth, she gets some financial assistance from the Swedish church. And later that year, John Stride passes away in the Poplar Asylum from heart failure. He'd gone from the workhouse into the asylum because he was dying, effectively. But Elizabeth, she was in Flower and Dean Street, which is, again, dodgy as fuck. And she's listed as a charwoman, which is just again, I've discussed this before, it's like the lowest form of domestic servitude. It's just the really heavy work. Like it's not good for anybody. And at some point during this time as well, she bumps into this woman, Mary Malcolm, who's like a tailoress, yeah, who thinks Elizabeth is her sister, also named Elizabeth. And it's kind of weird because it's more like wishful thinking on Mary's part, because she knew her sister like struggled, she'd been, committed, and a bunch of other stuff had happened, a terrible divorce, all this jazz. And so when she sees Long Liz, she's like, that's my sister. And between 1883 and 1888, like these two women would meet kind of in secret, and Mary would give Elizabeth money, just I think out of guilt or some kind of need for compassion and care. Like every Saturday, I think at 4 o'clock, she would give her 2 shillings, which is, it's a lot back then. But Mary also gave her like clothes and stuff. And at one point, really weird, Elizabeth had shown up with a baby, and she got Mary to look after it for a spell, saying it was like her son. And then after taking the boy back, she was like, oh no, the baby had died, when it was probably just borrowed from someone to help like beg, because that was quite a common thing though. You would like borrow a baby to try and get people to give you more money when you were out begging, panhandling and whatnot. Now, back to 1884, when John dies in the Stepney Sick Asylum, right, in Whitechapel, this really affects Elizabeth. She fucking spirals. Like a couple weeks after the fact, she gets arrested on Commercial Road for soliciting and also drunken disorderly behaviour. And so she's arrested and she gets sentenced with 7 days hard labour. And like after this point, there's no like official record of Elizabeth like prostituting herself again. Clearly times are tough for Elizabeth. This is not going well for her. But yeah, after John dies, things don't go well for her. And then she meets Michael Kidney. And so she meets him and they start living together. Michael Kidney, he's like a dock worker and he's also a volunteer in the Army Reserve. And he's younger than Liz, so go Liz, good for you. But they start living together. They've got lodgings on Devonshire Street and then Fashion Street. Now this was not an easy relationship because the two of them like to drink and the two of them like to fight. Michael Kidney more so. Like Elizabeth reported him to the police for beating her and his brutality and like a lot of women who suffer domestic violence, she retracted those claims. Because what else are you going to do? Like, so they would fight and he would do things and she would leave. And every time they left, over the 3 years they were together, every time she left, she would go down to Flower and Dean Street. She would stay in the boarding house. And she would come back every now and again. And he would say it's because, she liked him more than she liked anybody else. And then Kidney, who was a drunk and a domestic abuser, was also, and you're going to be shocked by this, I know, an adulterer. So he would cheat on her because he contracts syphilis. Now, he couldn't get it from her because at this point she's not contagious, because that's just how the stages of syphilis work. So she's not contagious at this point. So he was clearly out stooping someone else. Speaking of syphilis, so syphilis is a degenerative condition and it basically rots your brain, right? And I'm not entirely surprised that between 1886 and 1888, she's swearing and cursing and using obscenities, like really consistently. Like they're getting worse, right? Just with abundance. and she's getting arrested for being drunk and disorderly. And Elizabeth at this point is like in the tertiary phase of syphilis, so yeah, she's arrested 4 times in 3 months and things are just not getting better. And she's got neurosyphilis, and because she's a drinker as well, the issues of the disease, the symptoms, they're hidden by the fact that she drinks. So people just see the fact that she's drinking and they wouldn't make the connection with the fact that her brain is deteriorating. But yes, after leaving Michael Kidney a final time, Elizabeth is staying at 32 Flower in Dean Street. So Elizabeth, she does some cleaning of the workhouse on the 29th of September 1888, and she earns a 6pence for it. And after that, she heads on to the Queen's Head pub on Commercial Street. So she goes out for a bit, but she does return back about 6:30 that evening with Elizabeth Tanner, who's, in charge of Flower and Dean Street. And so she pays for her lodgings. So later on that evening, Elizabeth gets ready to go out, and she asks Catherine Lane, another woman in the lodging house, to look after a length of green velvet. She's like, this is good quality fabric. What she was going to do with it, we don't know. She's only got 1 set of clothes. She's probably going to sell the velvet, probably. And she heads out the door, and this is where things get muddy. We have all of these contradicting reports regarding where Elizabeth was and what she was doing. Apparently she's been seen arguing with a man. At one point she was walking alone. She was wearing flowers. She wasn't wearing flowers. There were so many reports of this woman was in this doorway and this woman was over there, and they were clearly all Elizabeth Stride. No. Now, the most credible of these supposed sightings of Elizabeth Stride is by Israel Schwartz. He's Hungarian, it's 1:45 in the morning, and he's tottering through, Commercial Street. And he's going on to Berner Street, I think it is. And he sees a man and woman kind of having an argument, a disagreement of sorts. And as Schwartz is walking up towards this couple, this fight is starting to get physical. The dude physically throws the woman to the ground. And the woman screams thrice, right? Ah, ah, ah. He said it wasn't loud, but she just screamed 3 times. And so this dude crosses the street, because of course he isn't going to intervene in this violence against women. Of course not. It's Victorian London. It's fine, apparently. But as he crosses the street, there's a dude standing in the darkness smoking a pipe. And this dude is freaking out, so he just fucking legs it. And somebody shouts Lipsky after him, which is just a way of being anti-Semitic. But yeah, so around 1 a.m. on the 30th of September, this dude who sells costume jewellery is going through Dutfield's yard, and there he sees the body of Elizabeth Stride. So at some point, probably early 30th of September 1888, Elizabeth Stride met her death at the hands of a violent man. Her throat was slit. And I don't usually talk about the deaths specifically of the victims, but there's a few things that don't quite add up here for me. So this is known as the night of the double event because there were 2 murders that happened, and they're both attributed to Jack the Ripper. So the theory is Jack had killed Elizabeth, he was about to do his stuff, and he's interrupted. At this point, he just fucking legs it and goes to murder another woman because he needs to satiate this thirst for blood, obviously. However, I'm not entirely sure that's the case. So the MO is very, very different because the location doesn't add up. So this is a busy yard, behind a club. There's a lot of thoroughfare, there's lots of footfall. You're more likely to be caught. So far, every time, Jack has had his victim, it's been somewhere secluded. It's been very early hours of the morning. It is deliberately so he has time to do what he needs to do. To do this in a busy area where he's likely to get caught, the way the escalation process is going, this just doesn't add up. It seems that it's more likely that Elizabeth, who is known to get aggressive and get in a fight, that someone, whether it was someone looking for money or someone just looking for a thrill, slit her throat and left her there. Elizabeth Stride's death is the act of a violent man, an emotional man, a man who cannot get his shit together. So much so that he decided to murder a clearly ill woman. Elizabeth Stride, I am convinced, is a Ripper victim, but not a victim of Jack the Ripper. So obviously all the propaganda and sensationalism goes out after her death, and she's recognised by, the police officer that once courted her, and she's also recognised and identified, I should say, by a member of the Swedish church that she'd registered at. And I think he was one of the only few people at her funeral. So there's no money for anything, and she didn't really make connections. So she gets lowered into a pauper's grave. And this fella stands out at her inquest and talks about her and tries to give her some autonomy. And he provides a prayer in Swedish, a Swedish prayer, at her funeral. And so ends the story of Elizabeth Stride. Now, if you liked my retelling of this horrific story, feel free to rate and review 5 stars. Spotify, Apple Podcasts. If you're on Apple Podcasts, if you write something in the review, it just boosts up the algorithm somehow. It just really helps me on the business end of things. Now, God, I feel so weird having to be really positive after just this horrific tale of drudgery and shame and pain. It's so exhausting. I feel weird about it. But yeah, in the iTunes, Apple Podcast bit, anything you say just helps. It does. Now, you could say anything. You could tell me your favourite holiday. You could tell me your least favourite pie filling. I don't know. Whatever works. It doesn't really need to be about me. Nobody reads it anyway apart from me, who loves to hear your compliments because I'm just that person who needs your constant validation. I'm kidding. Or am I? A wee bit. So, yes, don't forget you can follow me on the socials. I have some Patreon stuff coming out at the end of the week as well. I'm Who Did What Now Pod on nearly everything apart from Twitter, where I'm Who Did What Now PD because there weren't enough characters in the username. I could have shortened it down, but I did not do that. So, recommendation time. Gonna do recommendations. So, we have reading. You know what? Everybody should read at least one Horrible Histories book. That's your assignment. Go read a Horrible Histories book. They're fun and they're generally close to the truth. It's always funnier the closer you are to the truth when it comes to history, is all I'm saying. For listening, I am going to recommend the song Labour by Paris Paloma. It fills me with a feminine rage, which I just kind of need at occasions, and it's so powerful, and it makes me think of so many events. It's just astounding. And for watching, you know what I was watching actually, and I'm going to recommend, I don't know if I'm watching because it's good, or I'm watching it because I'm just invested in Beth Dutton as a character, because I generally like unlikable women in TV shows. So Yellowstone, I've been watching Yellowstone, and I think I have a thing for Rip Wheeler. I wasn't expecting it, but maybe I like a reformed man or just a broken man. Either way, I'm feeling it. So, that is everything this week, and I shall bid you farewell. Adios, au revoir, au revoir, my friends. Bye-bye.